What makes a place feel unreal? Not imaginary, not invented, but somehow outside the normal grammar of the world. A strip of land appears on a map, surrounded by the same oceans that carry cargo ships, storms, tourists, and memory. Yet when people finally reach it, they speak in a different register. They lower their voices. They look longer than expected. They come home with facts, but also with a feeling they cannot easily name. Islands have always stirred that response. For centuries, they have served as the edges of our imagination, places where distance alters proportion and ordinary rules seem to loosen. On an island, nature can become exaggerated. Isolation can preserve what the mainland forgets. A small patch of earth can hold a whole private world. Strange animals, abandoned buildings, old fears, unfinished stories. Sometimes an island becomes a refuge, sometimes a warning. Sometimes it turns into a mirror, reflecting back the parts of human curiosity that are noble, reckless, lonely, or unresolved. This journey begins there between geography and emotion, not with fantasy, but with real places scattered across the planet. Places shaped by volcanoes, storms, silence, evolution, war, accident, and time. Some look serene from a distance and unsettling up close. Some carry the remains of human ambition. Others seem to resist us entirely, as if they have chosen their own terms of existence. What draws us to such places is not only their strangeness, it is the possibility that they reveal something about us. Our need to explore, our habit of naming what we barely understand, our longing to stand at the threshold of the unknown and call it beautiful, even when it unsettles us. So before we begin, hold on to that question. When a landscape feels impossible, are we looking at a mystery in nature or at the limits of our own imagination? How many layers can reality hold before it begins to resemble a dream? In the Philippines, there is a place that seems to answer with a quiet smile. It begins with a large island, Luzon, familiar enough on a map. Then comes a lake. In that lake rises a volcano. Inside the volcano rests another lake. And within that inner water sits a small island, almost like a final thought placed at the center of a sentence, too intricate to be accidental. Seen from above, the landscape feels less like geology than like an idea. Land holding water, water holding fire, fire holding water again. And at the heart of it all, one narrow piece of earth. The mind wants simplicity. It wants one horizon, one shoreline, one clear distinction between solid and fluid, safety and force. But this place resists simplicity. It folds in on itself, layer after layer, as though the planet were sketching in spirals. And yet nothing about it was designed for wonder. It was made slowly, through eruption, collapse, rainfall, heat, and time. Centuries of volcanic violence shaped what now appears almost delicate. Beneath the calm surface of the crater lake is the memory of fire. Beneath the beauty is pressure. The mountain at the center has erupted again and again, reminding everyone who lives nearby that the same forces that create astonishing forms can also erase them. That tension is what gives the place its hold on the imagination. It is not merely rare. It is unstable. The formation feels miraculous precisely because it is temporary. Another eruption could alter the shoreline, drain the water, bury the island, or create a new geometry no one has yet imagined. What looks eternal is, in truth, a pause. Maybe that is why this first island matters. It teaches us immediately that the world is stranger than our categories. Nature does not care whether we find a landscape elegant, confusing, or sublime. It simply continues shaping the earth in ways that exceed our neat descriptions. And perhaps that is the deeper wonder. Not that such a place exists, but that the world has always been more imaginative than we are. What kind of island can disappear in the fog even while it is right in front of you? Far out in the North Atlantic, off the coast of Nova Scotia, a thin curve of sand rises from the water with such modesty that it seems almost temporary. There are no cliffs announcing its presence, no mountains, no dramatic silhouette, only dunes, grass, wind, and a horizon that often closes in under gray weather. Yet for centuries, sailors learned to fear this quiet place more than they feared many storms. The danger was never only the island itself, it was the shifting world around it. Sandbars stretched outward beneath the surface like hidden hands, currents twisted unpredictably, fog erased distance and direction. A route that seemed safe could become fatal in a matter of hours. Over time, ship after ship failed to pass cleanly through these waters. Hulls split, masts vanished. Human confidence met a geography that would not stay still. And still, life persisted there. That may be the most astonishing part. On this narrow crescent, where the sea seems always ready to reclaim the land, wild horses move across the dunes with an almost ceremonial calm. They were not born there in the beginning. They arrived through human history, then remained long enough for the island to shape them into something singular. Salt wind, coarse grass, isolation, and endurance made them part of the place. They now seem less like animals introduced by accident than like the island's own memory made visible. There is something haunting in that contrast. Around the island lie the stories of wreckage, miscalculation, and loss. On the island itself, there is motion without panic. Horses lowering their heads to graze, mist sliding over the sand, freshwater ponds gathering sky. It is a landscape balanced between fragility and persistence, as though disaster and grace have agreed to share the same narrow ground. Perhaps that is why this place lingers in the imagination. It reminds us that danger is not always loud. Sometimes it comes disguised as emptiness, as beauty, as a line of sand under soft light. And sometimes survival does not look heroic at all. Sometimes it looks like a horse in the fog, still standing where so much else has gone under. What happens when innocence arrives after history, softening the outline of something we would rather not remember? In Japan's inland sea, there is a small island where visitors now step off the ferry into a scene that feels almost impossibly gentle. Paths wind through quiet woods, grass moves in the sea air, and everywhere rabbits appear. They gather at shoes, brush against legs, rise on their hind feet with bright expectation. The place seems to welcome affection without hesitation. At first glance, it feels like a refuge from modern noise. The island's charm is immediate, almost disarming. Children laugh, cameras click, hands reach down with food. The animals, unafraid and insistent, turn the landscape into something tender and strangely theatrical, as though the island itself has chosen to be remembered through softness. But beneath that softness lies another record, one written in secrecy, discipline, and chemical harm. In the early 20th century, this same island was used for the production of poison gas. It was removed from maps, hidden in plain sight by military intention. Behind the trees and modest hills, workers handled substances that scarred lungs, skin, and memory. The facilities built there served a machinery of war that extended far beyond the island's shores. For years, silence was part of the design. What happened there was not meant to enter public consciousness. It was meant to disappear into classified files and crumbling walls. Yet places rarely forget as completely as people hope. The old buildings remained. The story resurfaced. A museum now speaks where secrecy once ruled, offering context to those willing to pause and look beyond the rabbits. That contrast is the island's true power. Delight and discomfort coexist on the same paths. A visitor can move from playful noise to historical gravity in the space of a few minutes. And perhaps that is the unsettling lesson. Beauty does not erase what came before it. Gentleness can grow over damaged ground, but it does not cancel the past. It only changes the way we approach it. On this island, memory wears a softer face now. The question is whether we are willing to look past the surface long enough to understand why softness was needed in the first place. How far from the human world can a mystery still belong to us? In the South Atlantic, there is an island so remote that even imagining it requires a kind of mental subtraction. Remove cities, remove shipping lanes, remove ordinary rescue, ordinary witness, ordinary scale. What remains is a white, wind-beaten mass of volcanic rock and glacial ice rising from cold water with almost no invitation at all. For most of the year, it is wrapped in weather severe enough to make the horizon feel closed. Nearly all of its surface is sealed under ice. The coastline is a wall of steep cliffs and violent surf. There are no villages, no farms, no permanent human rhythm to soften the terrain into familiarity. Seals haul themselves onto narrow edges of rock. Seabirds circle and depart. Moss and hardy life cling where they can. The island seems less like a destination than a refusal, a place that has accepted existence without ever requiring company. And yet, even here, the human story intrudes in the form of one unanswered image. In the mid-20th century, an expedition discovered an abandoned lifeboat on the island. Not wreckage scattered by some clearly known disaster, not a documented emergency with names attached, but a boat without explanation. No confirmed shipwreck accounted for it. No bodies were found. No final signal stitched the object to a known chain of events. It simply existed there, in one of the loneliest places on Earth, as evidence of people whose final chapter had slipped beyond the archive. That is what gives the island its strange emotional gravity. It is not only remote, it is incomplete. The lifeboat transforms the place from a blank edge of geography into a question. Someone was close enough to reach it. Someone stood where almost no one stands. Someone vanished, leaving behind an object that outlived their story. We often imagine the modern world as fully mapped, fully named, fully retrievable. But this island suggests otherwise. Even now, there are corners of the planet where a human trace can appear like a sentence torn from its page. And perhaps that is what unsettles us most. Not the isolation itself, but the reminder that distance can still keep its secrets. What if an island could make Earth feel newly unfamiliar? South of the Arabian Peninsula, in the blue expanse of the Indian Ocean, there is a place where the landscape seems to have been imagined by life experimenting in private. Trees rise with canopies shaped like open umbrellas held upside down against the sky. Trunks swell, twist, and lift into forms that seem half botanical, half sculptural. When cut, some of these trees release a deep red resin, as though the island itself were carrying an older, stranger bloodstream. This is the kind of place that unsettles recognition. A traveler arrives with a lifetime of visual habits, expecting forests to resemble forests and vegetation to follow inherited patterns. But here, the familiar language of leaves and branches changes accent. Plants look prehistoric, improvised, even deliberate in their oddness. Succulents swell like stone vessels. Trees resemble bottles, umbrellas, or inventions from a dream. The air, the cliffs, the plateaus, the white beaches at the island's edge all seem to belong to one world, while the living forms rooted in that world seem to belong to another. Its strangeness was written over immense time. Separated from nearby continents millions of years ago, the island became an isolated workshop of evolution. Species remained, adapted, diverged. With little interference, life followed paths found nowhere else. Many of the island's plants and animals exist only here, as if the place had been quietly composing its own version of nature, while the rest of the planet moved on with a different draft. And yet this island is not fantasy. People live here. Herds move across the highlands. Wind wears at rock. Weather changes. The extraordinary exists beside the ordinary, which may be the most profound thing about it. Wonder is not always separated from daily life. Sometimes it stands directly within it. Shaded by a tree no one would believe if they had not seen it. Perhaps that is why the island stays with those who encounter it. It reminds us that reality does not owe us familiarity. The world is not built around what we expect to recognize. There are still places where the earth appears to have dreamed for itself, and in doing so left us with a landscape that feels less like an escape from the world than a deeper introduction to it. What does a city leave behind when its purpose disappears? Off the coast of Nagasaki, a small island rises from the sea in a block of gray concrete, its silhouette so severe that it resembles a warship anchored forever in place. From a distance, it looks less like an island than an argument against softness. Walls meet water. Buildings crowd one another. There is almost no visible margin between human ambition and the ocean waiting outside it. Once this place was not empty at all. It pulsed with labor, routine, appetite, and exhaustion. Coal drawn from beneath the seabed made the island valuable, and value drew people in by the thousands. Families lived in stacked apartment blocks under laundry lines and smoke. Children ran through corridors. Schools, shops, clinics, stairways, rooftops, and communal rooms were compressed into a fragment of land so small it seemed to defy domestic life. Yet a whole society took shape there, dense and disciplined, built around the engine beneath the rock. Then the world changed faster than the island could. Energy shifted, coal lost its hold, industry moved on. And with that movement, the reason for the settlement vanished. By the mid-1970s, the last residents had gone. What remained was not ruin in the ancient sense, but something more intimate, the shell of recent life. Rooms still arranged for return, objects still waiting in place. Concrete towers facing the sea with no one at the windows. Time did the rest with patient force. Salt entered steel. Storms battered corners and roofs. Plants found cracks. Floors sagged. Walls opened. What had once embodied progress began to look like a memory too heavy to carry forward. The island became a monument not only to industry, but to impermanence, to the speed with which a crowded human world can fall silent when the system holding it together loses relevance. And that may be the deepest unease such a place creates. We tend to imagine civilization as durable because it is busy, but activity is not permanence. A city can be alive one decade and skeletal the next. On this island, the ocean does not merely surround history, it witnesses how quickly a human world can become an echo. What turns grief into ritual, and ritual into a landscape no one can forget? In the ancient canals south of Mexico City, there is a small island where the trees do not offer shade so much as company. From their branches hang dolls weathered by years of rain, dust, and sunlight. Some still have faces, some have only fragments of faces. Limbs are missing, eyes are clouded. Heads tilt at angles that feel almost conversational, as though the island has become a place where objects wait to be noticed long after their original owners are gone. The first response is usually discomfort. It is difficult to look at so many broken figures gathered in one place without sensing that something private has spilled into public view. Childhood, which is often associated with safety and innocence, appears here in another form, abandoned, cracked, suspended in silence. The effect is not loud horror, it is quieter than that, more mournful, more intimate. The dolls seem less designed to frighten than to testify. According to the story most often told, a man living alone on the island believed the spirit of a drowned girl lingered near the water. He found a doll in the canal, or believed he did, and hung it in the trees as an offering. One gesture became many. Over the years, he continued gathering discarded dolls and adding them to the island, as if repetition might calm whatever sorrow or presence he felt around him. Whether one reads this as haunting, devotion, loneliness, or the slow architecture of obsession, the result is the same. A place transformed by one man's attempt to answer something he could not explain. Visitors now arrive by boat and carry their own responses with them. Some bring dolls to contribute, some leave quickly. Some stay long enough to hear how wind passing through branches and hollow plastic can sound strangely like whispering. The island holds all of these reactions without resolving them. Maybe that is why it endures in memory. It does not demand belief in ghosts. It asks something harder. What do we do with sorrow when it refuses to leave quietly? Sometimes people write prayers. Sometimes they build monuments. And sometimes on a small island in the canals, they hang broken dolls in trees and call that arrangement a conversation with the unseen. What does it mean for a place to say no so completely that the modern world must finally listen? In the Bay of Bengal, beyond the routes of tourism and ordinary curiosity, there is an island covered in dense forest and edged by pale beaches, where one of humanity's oldest boundaries still holds. From afar, it appears serene. Trees lean toward the shore. Surf breaks in repeating lines. But the calm is deceptive. This island is not open to interpretation. It has been defended again and again with unmistakable clarity. For thousands of years, the people living there have remained apart from the systems that absorb nearly everyone else. No roads connect them to a larger nation. No trade routes have folded them into global exchange. Their lives have continued outside the assumptions that modernity makes about contact, development, and progress. We know very little about their language, their customs, or even their number. And perhaps the most honest response to that absence of knowledge is restraint rather than intrusion. History has not always chosen restraint. Outsiders have approached the island with curiosity, with imperial confidence, with religious conviction, and with the familiar belief that reaching another people is automatically a good. Yet each approach has exposed the same misunderstanding. Not every human community is waiting to be discovered. Some are protecting not only territory, but the integrity of a way of being. Arrows launched from the beach have served as a message more coherent than any diplomatic statement. Stay away. Let distance remain distance. There is a profound tension in that reality. Part of us wants to know more. Curiosity is one of our strongest human instincts. It has carried ships across oceans and telescopes into the dark. But curiosity, unchecked by humility, becomes entitlement. On this island, the moral boundary is clearer than the geographic one. To respect the people there means accepting that their refusal is not a puzzle to solve. And that may be the lesson this island offers the rest of us. In a time when nearly every place is photographed, measured, and shared, there is still meaning in what remains unentered. Perhaps wisdom is not always found in crossing the final threshold. Sometimes it lies in recognizing that another human story has the right to remain beyond our reach, whole and undisturbed beneath its own trees. How concentrated can danger become before a landscape stops feeling like landscape at all? Off the coast of Brazil, in warm Atlantic water that gives no hint of what waits beyond the shoreline, there is a small island covered in dense vegetation and silence. Seen from a distance, it appears almost inviting. Green, steep, sunlit, the kind of place a passing sailor might imagine as untouched and full of life. And it is full of life. That is precisely the problem. Within the forest lives one of the most concentrated snake populations on Earth. These are not harmless reptiles sunning on distant rocks. They are highly venomous vipers shaped by isolation into something even more efficient than their mainland relatives. Long ago, rising seas cut the island off from the continent, trapping a population that could no longer rely on the prey it once knew. Evolution answered with ruthless elegance. The snakes adapted to hunt birds, and because birds can escape if given even a few seconds, the venom became faster, stronger, more decisive. The result is an island where biology itself has redrawn the meaning of distance. Every branch, every patch of leaf litter, every shadow saw can hold a living threat. The danger is not dramatic in the cinematic sense. It does not chase. It waits. It hangs quietly at eye level. It disappears into bark, into green, into the ordinary textures of a forest until a step or a reach turns the invisible into the immediate. For that reason, access is tightly controlled. The island stands as a rare example of a place where human beings have had to admit that fascination does not equal permission. Scientists may enter under strict conditions, but even they move with the caution of guests in a system that was never arranged for human comfort. And perhaps that is what makes the island so compelling. It reminds us that nature is not always balanced around our presence. Sometimes life evolves toward beauty we can admire only from afar. Sometimes the world produces a form of perfection that excludes us entirely. On this island, survival belongs to what adapted first, and the wisest human response is not conquest, but distance. Can paradise feel unsettled even when nothing visible is wrong? In the middle of the Pacific, far from the crowded certainties of continental life, there is an atoll of coral palms and clear water so beautiful that it seems almost too complete. The lagoon glows with impossible shades of blue. Seabirds pass over beaches that appear untouched. Reef and sunlight arrange themselves with such precision that the place could be mistaken for the purest version of escape. And yet some landscapes carry another register beneath their beauty. This atoll has long inspired not only admiration, but unease. Sailors, researchers, and temporary visitors have described a feeling difficult to quantify, as if the island's perfection leaves too much room for the mind to hear itself. Isolation can sharpen perception. Silence can become interpretive. A place with no permanent community, no familiar human rhythm, and no easy route of departure can begin to feel less like refuge than exposure. That unease deepens because the island is layered with story. Over time, legends attach themselves to it. Whispers of buried treasure, fragments of maritime rumor, the old human impulse to imagine that remote beauty must conceal a secret worth killing for. Whether such stories are true in their details matters less than what they reveal. We have always projected longing onto islands, especially those distant enough to remain partly unknowable. Gold, loss, danger, redemption. The map invites fiction before fact can settle in. But one event gave the atoll a darker permanence. In the 20th century, a couple arrived by yacht, and another pair soon crossed their path. What followed became one of those unresolved island histories that resist clean narration. A disappearance, a body found later under horrifying circumstances. Another body never recovered. Conviction without full clarity. Motive without total resolution. Even now, the atoll keeps part of that story to itself. Perhaps that is why this place lingers so powerfully in the imagination. It joins two truths we prefer to keep separate: that beauty can be real and that it can still hold violence within its frame. The clear water does not explain the past. The palms do not soften it. They simply continue moving in the wind, as if paradise too can become a keeper of unfinished human stories. What do all these islands share beyond their distance from the mainland and the strange images they leave in the mind? At first, they seem to belong to different worlds entirely. One is shaped by volcanic fire, another by shipwreck and fog. One carries the burden of war beneath a surface of innocence. Another stands empty, packed with the remains of labor. Some resist us through biology, some through weather, some through human refusal, and some through the unfinished stories we keep telling about them. But look longer and a pattern begins to emerge. Each island is a form of separation, not only geographic separation, though that matters. More deeply, each one has been set apart by time, by isolation, or by the limits of what human beings can comfortably absorb. Islands compress reality. They take one condition and intensify it. Survival becomes more visible. Memory becomes harder to ignore. Beauty becomes sharper because there is less to distract from it. So does danger. This may be why islands have always occupied such a powerful place in the imagination. They are not merely pieces of land surrounded by water. They are laboratories of consequence. On them, nature can evolve along unusual lines. Human ambition can overbuild, then vanish. Grief can become ritual. Secrecy can settle into the landscape. A single decision repeated over years can transform an entire shoreline into a symbol. Isolation does not create meaning by itself, but it magnifies whatever arrives there. And perhaps that is what has been quietly unfolding through every chapter of this journey. These islands are not strange because they sit beyond the human story. They are strange because they reveal that story in concentrated form. They show us what happens when wonder is left alone with time, when fear has room to echo, when beauty is not balanced by familiarity. In that sense, the real mystery is not the islands themselves. It is the human response they summon. Why do we keep returning in thought and in story to places that unsettle us? Perhaps because at the edge of the map, we do not only find unusual landscapes, we find our own curiosity stripped down to its most honest shape. What remains after the last astonishing image fades? Not the drone shot, not the dramatic headline, not even the inventory of unusual facts. What remains is usually quieter. A question, a sensation, the feeling that the world is not exhausted by what we already know of it. These islands, for all their visual strangeness, endure in memory because they touch something older than spectacle. The human need to locate meaning in places that seem to stand apart. Perhaps that is why they so often become vessels for story. We look at an island and imagine beginnings, endings, exile, refuge, treasure, contamination, survival. We assign narratives because separation invites interpretation. A shoreline feels like a border, and borders make us wonder what has been preserved inside them. Yet the deeper truth is that islands do not exist for our symbolism. They are not metaphors first. They are real environments, real histories, real communities, real losses. Their mystery becomes most meaningful when we resist flattening it into entertainment alone. To stand before such a place, whether physically or in the mind, is to be reminded of proportion. Human beings build, invade, classify, abandon, protect, exploit, and remember. Nature continues shaping rock, weather, animal life, and silence on scales both larger and slower than our plans. Sometimes our stories leave scars. Sometimes they leave ruins. Sometimes they leave only fragments and rumors. But always the island remains partly itself, more than the version we tell about it. And so, as this journey nears its close, the question changes. We no longer ask only which island was strangest, or most beautiful, or most haunting. We ask what it means that such places still exist in a century so saturated with images and access. Maybe their true gift is humility. They remind us that the world is still capable of refusing simplification. That mystery is not always ignorance waiting to be solved. Sometimes it is a form of respect, a recognition that reality can be fully real and still exceed the stories we bring to it. The final shoreline is approaching. What waits there is not an answer, but a way of seeing. In the end, the world does not become less mysterious because we map it more carefully. It becomes, in some ways, more so. The closer we look, the more we find places that resist being reduced to a single meaning. An island can be a sanctuary and a warning, a scientific wonder and a graveyard of memory, a paradise shaped by coral light and an archive of unease. The contradiction is not a flaw in the story. It is the story. Across this journey, we have moved through fire, fog, silence, ruins, rituals, and reefs. We have seen landscapes that seem designed to challenge the eye and histories that challenge the conscience. We have encountered places where nature evolved beyond familiarity, places where human beings left behind machinery, sorrow, secrecy, or violence, and places that still stand apart because distance itself has become a form of protection. Each island had offered a different image, but together they formed a single meditation on how little it takes for the ordinary world to become extraordinary. A shift in isolation, a turn in memory, a shoreline no one crosses twice in quite the same way. What these islands reveal, finally, is not that Earth is hiding another world. It is that this world has always been deeper, stranger, and more emotionally layered than our daily routines allow us to notice. We spend much of life moving quickly, naming things for convenience, trusting familiarity to keep the world manageable. But beyond the usual routes, there are still places that slow us down and ask more difficult questions. What do we preserve? What do we forget? When should we approach, and when should we leave well enough alone? What do beauty and danger owe each other in the same landscape? Perhaps that is the lasting value of these far-flung pieces of land. They do not simply astonish us. They return us to humility. They remind us that wonder is not childish, that mystery is not the enemy of truth, and that some of the most meaningful encounters we have with the world begin when certainty loosens its grip. And somewhere tonight, beyond shipping lanes and weather reports, every one of these islands is still there, silent, real, waiting not to be conquered, but to be contemplated.